If you blinked this week, you missed an absolute avalanche of Commanders news, and trust me, you do not want to be the last person in your group chat to find out what just happened in Ashburn. We're talking season-ending injuries, a surprise release nobody saw coming, a flurry of last-minute roster moves, and a trade rumor that could completely reshape Washington's offensive line before the regular season even kicks off. Buckle up, because this is one of those weeks where the Commanders decided to cram an entire month's worth of drama into just a few practice days. Let's start with the news that's genuinely tough to swallow if you're a Washington fan, because two players just had their entire 2026 seasons wiped out before it even started. Wide receiver River Craycraft and running back Jerome Ford have both officially landed on injured reserve, meaning their seasons are done before Week 1 has even kicked off. For Ford specifically, this one stings a little more than usual, because he was actually working his way into a legitimate role in Washington's backfield rotation before a hamstring injury suffered during the preseason opener against Miami ended his year in an instant. One moment you're fighting for reps and a roster spot. The next you're staring down months of rehab while your teammates suit up without you. It's a brutal, unglamorous reminder of just how fragile an NFL career really is, and it's a gut punch to a running back room that was already dealing with question marks. And Craycraft's situation carries its own bittersweet sting, too. This is a guy who came back to Washington specifically because he believed in what this team was building. A veteran receiver who's bounced around the league for nearly a decade, Denver, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Miami, Seattle, before finding a home in D.C. He was even reportedly circling this preseason as something of a personal revenge game against some old teams. Instead, his season is over before he even got the chance to make it count. These are the moments that never make the highlight reels, but they matter. And they're worth remembering the next time you're frustrated about a running back rotation or a receiver depth chart that suddenly looks a little thinner than it did last week. But injuries weren't the only thing shaking up the roster this week. In a move that caught plenty of people off guard, Washington released punter Matt Hack, the veteran who had been holding down punting duties while the team's longtime star, Tress Way, worked his way back from a pectoral injury that kept him sidelined to open camp. Hack did his job admirably, even punting for the team in their preseason opener against Miami. But now that Way appears to be back in the fold, Hack becomes the classic story of a bridge player whose job, by design, was always temporary. It's not glamorous, but it's the reality of life on the fringes of an NFL roster. You get your shot, you do your job, and then the guy you were literally there to replace comes back healthy and takes his spot right back. To fill the 3 open roster spots created by these moves, Washington brought in a trio of new names. Veteran linebacker Chris Barnes, former Michigan defensive tackle Maurice Hurst, and tight end Trey McKitty. Now, let's be real about what these signings actually represent. This isn't the front office making a bold declaration about the future of the franchise. This is roster maintenance, pure and simple, restocking bodies to get back to a full 90-man roster during a physically brutal stretch of camp. Barnes arguably has the best chance of sticking around, given his experience bouncing around practice squads as organizational depth at linebacker. But with how the Commanders' linebacker room is already shaping up, don't be shocked if none of these 3 names are still on the roster by the time final cuts roll around. That's just the nature of these late summer transactions. Teams need bodies to survive the grind of camp, and sometimes those bodies are just there to hold a roster spot warm. Now here's where things get genuinely fascinating, because there's a trade rumor swirling around Washington's offensive line that could end up being one of the more significant storylines of the entire summer. As Commanders fans painfully know by now, the team's offensive line took a devastating hit when Pro Bowl left tackle Laramie Tunsil suffered a torn triceps injury in a training camp pass rush drill, an injury serious enough to require surgery and likely keep him out for a significant chunk, if not all, of the 2026 season. That's about as close to a nightmare scenario as it gets for a team trying to protect its franchise quarterback. In Tunsil's absence, Washington has slid Brandon Coleman over to left tackle, and while Coleman is a talented, athletic player in his own right, he's also unproven in that exact role, which has left the door open for speculation about outside help. Two names have specifically started circulating as potential trade targets for Washington if they decide to go outside the building for tackle help. The first is Pittsburgh Steelers tackle Broderick Jones, a former top 15 pick who's still only 25 years old and possesses genuinely elite physical tools, the kind of fluid, athletic movement teams covet at the tackle position. But there's a real catch here. Jones is coming off a serious neck injury that ended his season last year, and the recovery process reportedly forced him to shed a significant amount of weight, since heavy lifting simply isn't possible while healing from that type of injury. He's technically been a full participant in Pittsburgh's camp and even played in their preseason opener, but he's still working to rebuild back toward his normal playing weight, and it's genuinely unclear whether he'll get there before Week 1 arrives. Add in the fact that Pittsburgh has already invested premium draft capital in two other tackles and doesn't appear to view Jones as part of their long-term plans, and you can see why his name is floating around the rumor mill. The second name generating buzz is Jacksonville Jaguars tackle Walker Little, a former second-round pick who spent his entire career with the Jaguars and has accumulated real starting experience at left tackle. He's 27 years old, built like an absolute tank at 6'7" and over 300 pounds, and while his career grades haven't exactly lit the league on fire, he's a proven, available body with legitimate NFL starting experience, exactly the type of low-cost, low-risk depth piece a team dealing with a season-altering tackle injury might realistically pursue for something like a late Day 3 draft pick. Here's the thing worth sitting with, though. Neither of these names screams the answer to Washington's Tunsil problem. They're both flawed, complicated situations, one coming off a scary injury with real weight and conditioning question marks, the other a solid but unspectacular veteran presence rather than a difference-making replacement. And that puts real pressure on a decision that ultimately belongs to head coach Dan Quinn and his offensive line staff. Who know better than anyone watching from the outside whether Brandon Coleman can hold up as a full-time left tackle or whether this offensive line desperately needs an outside veteran presence to stabilize things before the games start counting. It's the kind of decision that could genuinely swing the trajectory of Washington's season. And it's absolutely a storyline worth tracking closely as the roster cut-down deadline approaches. Meanwhile, on the injury front more broadly, Washington was without a notable group of players during a recent practice session. Edge rushers Odafe Owe and Kelvon Chaisson, defensive tackle Jer'Jon Newton, and linebacker Jordan McGee were all held out. There's reporting suggesting Newton and McGee are dealing with relatively minor issues worth monitoring over the coming days, while Owe's absence may have simply been a scheduled veteran rest day rather than anything concerning. Either way, it's the kind of collection of missing names that always sets off a low hum of anxiety among fans scrolling social media during camp, even when the underlying explanation ends up being far less dramatic than the initial worry suggests. But let's pivot to the genuinely exciting stuff, because amid all this roster shuffling and injury news, quarterback Jayden Daniels continues to look like a man on an absolute mission this training camp. During a recent 2-minute drill period, Daniels was reportedly locked in and surgical, finding star wideout Stephon Diggs for a big gainer down the sideline before connecting with tight end Chig Okonkwo on a beautifully placed touchdown down the seam. That kind of chemistry with two different pass catchers in one single drive is exactly the sign Commanders fans have been desperately hoping to see. Daniels has spent this entire offseason absorbing a brand new offensive system under first-year coordinator David Blow, and the early verdict from people watching practice up close has been remarkably consistent. He looks comfortable, confident, and dangerously accurate inside this new scheme. For a team that's putting so much faith in Daniels becoming a legitimate MVP-caliber talent this season, every single one of these reported surgical practice performances should have fans feeling genuinely good about where things stand. And right behind Daniels, in that quarterback room, there's an interesting subplot developing at the backup spot. With veteran Marcus Mariota sidelined and expected to remain out for a stretch, it's been Ethan Kaliakmanis stepping into that QB2 role during recent practices, taking the reps directly behind Daniels even against second-team units. According to reports from the practice field, Kaliakmanis has been working ahead of fellow depth quarterback Sam Hartman in that rotation, which suggests he's currently the favorite to get the first crack at extended snaps in Washington's next preseason game. It's a small subplot in the grand scheme of things, but quarterback depth matters enormously in a league where one bad hit can change an entire season, and watching how this backup competition sorts itself out over these final preseason weeks is worth keeping an eye on. And finally, let's give a proper shout-out to a player who doesn't always get the spotlight but absolutely deserves one this week, safety Percy Butler. This is a guy who's quietly carved out a role as dependable depth in Washington's secondary for several seasons now, and during a recent practice, he made an interception that had everybody on the sideline buzzing. A full extension, one-handed grab. Timed perfectly, snatched clean out of the air. It's the kind of highlight reel play that reminds you why depth players matter just as much as the stars. Because when injuries hit, and in the NFL injuries always hit, it's guys like Percy Butler who end up getting thrust into bigger roles, and plays like that one-handed interception are exactly the reason coaches trust him to be ready when his number gets called. So where does all of this leave the Washington Commanders as the calendar creeps closer to the regular season? It's a team simultaneously dealing with real heartbreak, two players losing their entire seasons to injury, while also navigating a genuinely fascinating decision about whether to go outside the building for offensive line help after losing their best pass protector for a significant chunk of the year. It's a team restocking its roster with camp bodies most fans will never remember by name, while also watching their franchise quarterback continue building what could be a truly special connection with a stacked group of pass catchers. It's chaotic, it's a little bit messy, and it's exactly what training camp is supposed to look like in the final stretch before the games start actually counting. Keep your eyes locked on Ashburn over these next couple of weeks, because between the offensive line trade speculation, the ongoing quarterback battle behind Jayden Daniels, and the final roster cuts looming on the horizon, this Commanders training camp saga is absolutely not slowing down anytime soon. If this breakdown kept you in the loop on everything happening in Commanders camp, do not scroll past without smashing that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow more than you'd think. Drop a comment below and let me know whether you think Washington should actually go out and trade for offensive line help, because I want to hear your take on Broderick Jones versus Walker Little versus just riding with Brandon Coleman. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because there is so much more Commanders coverage headed your way. And you do not want to miss a single update. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.